The courtroom went silent when Claire Whitmore placed one hand over her 8-month pregnant belly and looked directly at the man she had loved for nearly a decade. Nathaniel Whitmore sat across from her in a charcoal suit, his face calm, almost bored. To anyone watching, he looked exactly like the man New York magazines described him as: a powerful real estate executive, a generous donor, a man whose name could open doors from Park Avenue boardrooms to private dining rooms at the plaza. But Claire knew the other Nathaniel, the man people called Nate when they wanted something, the man whose family connections stretched far beyond legitimate business, the man who had built his life on the belief that everyone eventually had a price. And, sitting 3 rows behind him, was Vanessa Caldwell, 31 years old, elegant, confident, wearing a cream-colored designer coat and the Tiffany bracelet Claire had once seen on a credit card statement that Nate insisted was a corporate gift. Claire had known about the affair for months. Still, seeing Vanessa inside the courtroom made the betrayal feel different. This was no longer a secret. Nate had brought his mistress into the room where his marriage was being buried. Claire's attorney leaned toward her. "We can ask for more time," she whispered. "You don't have to sign today." Claire barely heard her. Her eyes remained fixed on Nate, on the polished Mont Blanc pen beside his right hand, on the Rolex beneath his cuff, on the man who had once cried when a pregnancy test finally showed 2 lines after 6 years of doctors, failed treatments, and nights when Claire had quietly wondered whether she would ever become a mother. Nate had held her that morning. He had kissed her forehead. "We finally got our family," he had whispered. Now their son moved beneath Claire's palm, while Nate prepared to end that family before the child had even taken his first breath. The judge reviewed the settlement one final time. Property division, separate residences, medical insurance through the pregnancy, future custody to be determined after birth. Everything sounded clean when spoken in legal language. Nothing sounded like betrayal. Claire finally spoke. "Nate." He looked up. Vanessa shifted behind him. Claire swallowed the pain burning in her throat. "If you sign this today, you're not confused anymore." Nate's lawyer glanced at him. Claire continued. "You don't get to tell me later that things happened too fast. You don't get to say you were angry or pressured." Nate's jaw tightened. "Claire, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. "I'm asking one question." The baby kicked again. Claire slowly turned her gaze toward Vanessa, then back to her husband. "If I walk out of this courtroom today, you're choosing her?" For the first time, Nate hesitated. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then he said, "Yes." Claire nodded. Something inside her finally became still. "You chose her." Nate picked up the Mont Blanc pen. He signed. The sound of the pen moving across paper was almost nothing. Yet Claire would remember it for the rest of her life. Nate pushed the documents toward his attorney and leaned back, as though the difficult part was over. He had no idea that outside that courtroom were doctors, business owners, clergy members, employees, donors, and families who had spent years believing in the Whitmore name for one reason he had never bothered to understand: Claire. And within 48 hours, the first person would walk away from him. Nate thought he had signed away a wife he could replace. He was about to discover that Claire had been holding together a world he never truly owned. 8 years earlier, Claire Morgan had not known the Whitmore name carried weight in rooms she had never entered. She was 30 years old then, working 12-hour shifts in the emergency department at New York Presbyterian Hospital. Her life was simple, exhausting, and completely her own. She rented a small apartment in Queens, drove a used Honda, called her retired firefighter father every Sunday, and still kept one of her mother, Rose's, old recipe cards taped inside a kitchen cabinet. Claire did not come from money. She came from people who showed up. That was the lesson Daniel Morgan had taught her without ever putting it into words. If someone was sick, you visited. If a neighbor lost a job, you brought groceries. If a friend's mother died, you stayed after everyone else had gone home. Claire carried that same instinct into nursing. That was how she first met Nathaniel Whitmore. Nate arrived in the emergency department close to midnight with one of his construction supervisors, a man named Eddie Palmer, who had fallen from scaffolding at a renovation site in Midtown. Nate came in wearing a dark cashmere coat, polished shoes, and a watch worth more than Claire made in a year. He also came in giving orders. "I want the head of trauma down here now." Claire barely looked at him. "You're blocking the hallway." Nate stared at her. "I'm with the patient. You're with the wall, unless you move." One of the younger nurses tried to hide a smile. Nate was not used to being spoken to that way. Claire did not care. Amon was bleeding. That mattered. Nate's last name did not. For the next 2 hours, Claire helped stabilize Eddie while doctors checked for internal injuries. Nate stayed outside the treatment bay, pacing, making calls on his iPhone, speaking in a low voice that made people around him move faster. When Claire finally stepped out, he asked only one question. Is he going to live? Yes. Nate exhaled for the first time all night. The arrogance disappeared for one brief second. Claire remembered that. The next morning, he returned with coffee for the entire nursing staff, Starbucks trays, pastries, flowers for the front desk. Claire handed her coffee to another nurse. Nate noticed. You don't drink coffee? I do. Then why give it away? Because you didn't need to buy me one. That made him laugh. It was probably the first time Claire saw something warm in him. Their relationship did not begin like a fairy tale. It began with breakfast after one of Claire's shifts, then dinner, then Sunday walks through Central Park. Nate never hid that his family was complicated. He said Whitmore development was built through real estate, logistics, construction, and old relationships that could be difficult to explain. Claire understood enough to know there were parts of his world she wanted no part of. So before they married, she gave him rules. No guns in our home. Nate raised an eyebrow. Anything else? No business at the dinner table. No using my name on anything I don't understand. And if someone is afraid of you, don't bring that fear into my house. He had smiled then. Yes, Nurse Morgan. She believed him. For several years, Nate gave her reasons to. He remembered her father's birthday. He visited Rose Morgan's grave with Claire every Mother's Day. When Claire worked Christmas Eve, Nate brought dinner to the entire nursing station and stayed until her shift ended. There had been goodness in him once. That truth would make everything later hurt more. After their wedding, Claire kept working. She did not want to become a decorative wife who appeared beside Nate at charity dinners. But gradually, the Whitmore Community Foundation pulled her in. At first she volunteered one afternoon a week. Then two. Then people started calling Claire directly. A widow needed help understanding hospital bills. A driver's son needed a specialist. A teacher in Queens needed laptops for a classroom. An employee's family could not afford a funeral. Nate solved problems with checks. Claire solved them by remembering names. At charity events, photographers usually wanted Nate. He wore tailored suits, shook hands, and stood beneath banners carrying the Whitmore name. Claire often stayed near the edges of the room. She preferred talking to nurses, parents, volunteers, and children. That suited Nate perfectly. He got the photographs. She handled the people. Neither of them realized how important that difference would become. Then came the years Claire rarely discussed in public. The fertility appointments, the hormone injections, the hopeful mornings followed by devastating phone calls. 6 years of trying, 3 failed IVF cycles, 1 miscarriage so early that almost nobody knew except Claire, Nate, and Dr. Maggie Lawson. There was one night after another failed treatment when Claire sat on the bathroom floor in a robe, staring at a box of medication she no longer needed. Nate found her there. For once, he did not offer money or solutions. He sat beside her on the cold tile. Claire rested her head against his shoulder and cried. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Nate turned toward her sharply. "For what?" "For not being able to give you a family." He took her face in both hands. "Claire, you are my family." She believed him. That memory would return years later like a blade. Because when Claire finally became pregnant naturally, at 38, Nate cried harder than she did. He stared at the test, then at her, then dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead against her stomach, even though there was nothing to see yet. "We finally got our family," he whispered. Claire laughed through tears. For weeks, Nate seemed changed. He came to appointments. He read baby books on his iPad. He argued over nursery colors. He ordered a crib that cost too much. Claire let herself believe the hardest years were behind them. But on the same week Claire reached 12 weeks pregnant, Nate approved a promotion inside the Whitmore Community Foundation. A 31-year-old communications executive named Vanessa Caldwell was moved into a position that placed her beside him at almost every public event. Claire congratulated her. Vanessa smiled warmly. Nate said it was just business. At the time, Claire believed both of them. She had no idea that while she was finally building the family she had prayed for, another woman had already begun studying how to take her place inside it. Vanessa Caldwell did not enter Nate Whitmore's life looking like a threat. That was what made her dangerous. She was 31, polished, ambitious, and unusually good at reading a room. She knew when to speak, when to laugh, and when to make powerful people feel more interesting than they really were. At the Whitmore Community Foundation, that skill was valuable. Vanessa understood donors. She understood press. She understood how a photograph could turn one charitable dinner into a week of favorable headlines. And she understood Nate almost immediately. He liked admiration, not loud admiration, not obvious flattery. He preferred the kind that made him feel as though respect had been earned. Vanessa gave him exactly that. "You see things other people miss," she told him during one strategy meeting. Nate smiled. Claire, sitting at the other end of the conference table with a folder of maternal health requests, barely noticed. At 12 weeks pregnant, she was tired almost constantly. Morning sickness had become afternoon sickness. Her doctor had warned her to reduce unnecessary stress, especially after years of fertility treatment. So when Vanessa offered to attend more evening events with Nate, Claire was relieved. "Thank you," Claire told her. Vanessa smiled. "Of course. You should be taking care of yourself." It sounded kind. For a while, perhaps it even was. Vanessa began appearing beside Nate at fundraising dinners, property launches, and donor meetings. She carried an iPad filled with schedules. She remembered the names of reporters. She knew which photographs should be approved before publication. When Nate forgot a speech, Vanessa had a copy waiting on her MacBook Pro. When he disliked a question, she redirected the conversation. When he wanted a table at a restaurant booked 3 weeks in advance, she made one call. Nate started praising her at home. Vanessa saved the event tonight. Vanessa caught a problem before legal did. Vanessa understands how these people think. Claire never objected. Why would she? She had spent years helping build the foundation. She wanted competent people around it. But the first warning came on a Thursday night. Nate was attending a private donor dinner at the plaza. Claire had planned to go. Then nausea hit so badly she spent most of the afternoon lying beside the bathroom floor. Nate found her there while adjusting his cufflinks. "You should stay home." Claire looked up. "I know. I'll be back early." He kissed her forehead. Vanessa attended in her place. The next morning, Claire saw a photograph online. Nate stood in a black tuxedo. Vanessa was beside him in a silver evening gown. Nothing inappropriate, nothing she could point to. But Vanessa's hand rested lightly on Nate's forearm, and Nate was looking at her while she laughed. Claire stared at the image longer than she wanted to admit. Then she locked her iPhone. Hormones, she told herself. Exhaustion. Fear. She refused to become suspicious without a reason. The reasons came slowly. A dinner receipt from a French restaurant on Madison Avenue. 2 people. Nate said it had been a donor meeting. Then a Cartier charge appeared on a corporate card Claire still reviewed for foundation expenses. Nate said it was a retirement gift for a longtime partner. Claire believed him. Mostly. Then came the late calls. Nate began taking his phone into the hallway. Sometimes onto the balcony. Sometimes into his study with the door closed. If Claire asked who was calling, the answer was always the same. Business. One night, she woke at 1:17 a.m. and found his side of the bed empty. Light shone beneath the study door. Claire walked toward it barefoot. She heard Nate laughing softly. Not his business laugh, his real one. The laugh he used to give her. Claire froze. Then Vanessa's voice came through the door. Faint. Warm. Intimate. Claire stepped backward before Nate could see her. She returned to bed and stared at the ceiling until morning. At breakfast, she asked directly, "Are you having an affair with Vanessa?" Nate stopped pouring coffee. For 1 second, something crossed his face. Then it disappeared. No. Claire watched him. You talk to her after 1 in the morning. She handles communications across 3 time zones. At 1 in the morning? Nate's sigh hid. Claire, you're pregnant. You're tired. You're seeing things through that. Claire felt something inside her tighten. My pregnancy doesn't make me stupid. I didn't say that. You implied it. Nate set down his cup. You've been emotional for months. The words hurt more than Claire expected. She had spent years in emergency rooms making decisions while people screamed. She had held pressure on wounds, comforted dying patients, explained death to families. Now the man she loved was using pregnancy to make her doubt her own judgment. Claire said nothing else. That frightened Nate more than an argument would have. Over the next few weeks, Claire watched. Vanessa's perfume on Nate's jacket. A hotel reservation he could not explain clearly. messages that disappeared from his phone, a new password. Then, one evening, Nate left his iPad on the kitchen island. Claire was cutting an apple when the screen lit up. She did not touch it. She did not need to. The notification appeared clearly. Tomorrow can't come fast enough. D. Claire stared at the words until the screen went dark. No explicit confession. No photograph. No declaration of love. Still, she knew. She walked upstairs to the unfinished nursery. The crib had arrived, but was still wrapped in protective plastic. Paint samples sat on the floor. A small, stuffed elephant rested inside an open shopping bag. Claire lowered herself into the rocking chair. For the first time since becoming pregnant, she allowed herself to cry without trying to stop. Her hand moved across her belly. The baby shifted beneath it. Claire closed her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry. This is the family you're coming into." Downstairs, Nate's iPad lit up again. Another message from Vanessa. This time, Claire never saw it. Because Vanessa was no longer asking when Nate would leave his wife. She was asking whether he had already spoken to the divorce lawyer. 2 days after the divorce hearing, Nate Whitmore woke before sunrise and discovered that losing a wife felt surprisingly convenient. Claire's side of the bed was empty. Her books were gone from the nightstand. The framed ultrasound photograph that had once rested beside his Rolex case was gone too. But the townhouse still stood. His Mercedes S-Class still waited downstairs. Whitmore Development still occupied 3 floors of a Park Avenue tower. His phone still contained hundreds of contacts who answered when he called. Nothing looked ruined. That convinced Nate he had made the right decision. By 8:30 that morning, he was seated in a private dining room at a Manhattan hotel with Vanessa beside him. She wore a tailored ivory suit and the Cartier watch he had given her the night before. Nate had told himself the gift was not a celebration of the divorce. Vanessa knew better. Around the table sat senior employees from the Whitmore Community Foundation. Nate did not mention Claire by name. He simply announced that the foundation was entering a new chapter. Vanessa would take a larger public role. She would oversee communications, donor relations, and several upcoming healthcare initiatives. Vanessa smiled modestly. "I know Claire cared deeply about this work," she said. "I want to honor what came before while helping the foundation move forward." It was exactly the right sentence. Respectful enough to sound gracious. Careful enough to place Claire in the past. Nate looked around the table. No one objected. He mistook silence for agreement. Then Vanessa's iPhone vibrated. She glanced down. Her smile faded. "What?" Nate asked. Vanessa hesitated before turning the screen toward him. An email had arrived from Dr. Margaret Lawson. Maggie. For almost 11 years, Dr. Maggie Lawson had served on the Whitmore Community Foundation's Medical Advisory Board. Her name carried enormous weight among physicians, hospital executives, and major donors. The email was short. Effective immediately, I am resigning from the Whitmore Community Foundation Advisory Board. I appreciate the work we accomplished together and wish the staff well. No accusation. No explanation. No drama. Nate read it twice. Call her. Vanessa did. Straight to voicemail. Nate tried from his own phone. Same result. His jaw tightened. She's angry about Claire. Vanessa lowered her voice. Probably. Nate pushed back from the table. This is emotional. Give her a day. By noon, a pediatric specialist who served on the same advisory committee requested a temporary leave. At 2:15, a donor postponed a scheduled meeting concerning a 6-figure contribution to a maternal health program. At 3, one of the foundation's event sponsors asked whether Claire would remain involved. Nate finally stopped pretending he was not irritated. He called Claire. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice sounded tired. "What do you need?" The question bothered him immediately. Once, Claire would have said hello. Once, she would have asked whether he had eaten. Now he sounded like a stranger calling about paperwork. "Did you talk to Maggie?" A pause. "About what?" "She resigned this morning." Claire became quiet. Nate waited for surprise. When it came, it sounded genuine. "She resigned?" "Yes." "No, I didn't know." "Claire." "What?" "If you're angry with me, be angry with me. Don't involve the foundation." Claire slowly exhaled. "I haven't involved anyone. Maggie doesn't suddenly resign 2 days after our divorce for no reason." "Then ask Maggie." "She won't answer." "That should tell you something." Nate stood and walked toward the office windows overlooking Manhattan. "You expect me to believe this has nothing to do with you?" Claire's voice changed. Not louder, calder. You still think everything is controlled by someone, Nate. What does that mean? It means people can make decisions without being bought, threatened, or instructed. He said nothing. Claire continued. I didn't ask Maggie to leave. Then she ended the call. Nate stared at his phone. Across Queens, Claire sat alone at a small kitchen table in the furnished apartment she had rented temporarily. Her MacBook Air was open beside a blood pressure monitor. An unopened Amazon box sat near the door. She had spent the morning organizing medical insurance forms and changing emergency contact information. Maggie's resignation surprised her, but not as much as Nate's assumption that Claire had ordered it. A few minutes later, Claire opened the Amazon box. Inside were diapers, a baby monitor, 2 bottles, and several cotton sleepers she had ordered before the court hearing. At the bottom was a tiny blue onesie, Daddy's little guy. Claire froze. She held it between both hands. For months, she had imagined Nate wearing it proudly on their son. She could almost hear him joking about baseball games and first cars. Claire pressed the fabric against her mouth as tears finally came. Then she carefully folded it. She did not throw it away. She placed it beneath the other baby clothes. Her child still had a father. Claire refused to let heartbreak turn her into someone who would erase that truth. Across the river, another man was making a decision Nate knew nothing about. Robert Bobby Dawson sat inside the office of Dawson Freight and Logistics with a Whitmore development contract open in front of him. The renewal was worth millions. Bobby picked up his Mont Blanc pen, then stopped. On the corner of his desk stood a photograph of his daughter at 17, smiling without hair during chemotherapy. Claire stood beside her. Bobby stared at the picture for a long time. Then he closed the contract without signing it. Nate had just lost the second person who once believed standing beside him was worth the cost. And this time, the consequences would reach far beyond a charity board. By the end of the week, Nate Whitmore had stopped calling the changes around him a coincidence. One donor postponed a meeting, then another. A contractor who had always moved Whitmore projects to the front of the line suddenly said his crews were unavailable. A hospital administrator asked whether the foundation would be restructuring. A banker Nate had known for 12 years delayed dinner twice. Nothing had collapsed. That was what made it worse. There was no enemy to confront. No lawsuit. No public accusation. Just doors that used to open quickly now taking longer. Nate hated uncertainty more than bad news. Bad news could be handled. Uncertainty could not. On Friday morning, his assistant entered the Park Avenue office carrying a thick contract. Dawson Freight still hasn't returned the renewal. Nate looked up from his MacBook Pro. How late? 3 days. Nate frowned. Bobby Dawson was many things, but careless was not one of them. Dawson Freight and Logistics had moved materials for Whitmore Development for more than 15 years. Bobby knew Nate's schedules, his construction managers, his expectations. He also knew that delaying a contract worth several $1 million would get Nate's attention. Call him. I already did. And? He wants to meet in person. That answer bothered Nate. An hour later, his Mercedes stopped outside a brick industrial building in New Jersey. No photographers. No marble lobby. No assistants waiting with bottled water. Bobby's office smelled faintly of coffee, diesel fuel, and old paper. A framed photograph of his daughter stood beside the computer. Nate noticed it, but did not study it. He sat. Bobby remained standing. I assume this is about the contract. It is. Nate opened his leather folder. Our terms are better than last year. Fuel adjustment is covered. Volume guarantee increased 8%. I read it. Then what's the problem? Bobby looked at him for several seconds. You really don't know? Nate's expression hardened. If this is about my divorce, I don't discuss my marriage with vendors. Bobby gave a tired laugh. There it is. What? That word. Vendor. Nate leaned back. What would you prefer? Maybe the name of the man who worked with your family before you had 3 office floors on Park Avenue. Nate's patience shortened. Bobby, if you want different terms, say it. I don't want different terms. Then sign. Bobby looked toward the photograph on his desk. Nate followed his eyes this time. A teenage girl stood in a hospital room. She was thin. Her head was covered by a bright blue scarf. Beside her stood Claire. Nate stared at the picture. That's Emily? Bobby nodded. His daughter was 30 now, married, with 2 children. But 15 years earlier, Emily Dawson had been diagnosed with leukemia. Nate remembered. He had sent flowers, made calls, paid part of a medical bill when insurance created problems. At the time, he had considered the matter handled. I helped your family, Nate said. Bobby turned toward him. You sent money. Nate's eyes narrowed. I paid for almost half her treatment. Yes. Then what are we talking about? Bobby stepped closer to the desk. You sent money, Nate. He pointed toward Claire in the photograph. Claire showed up. The room became quiet. Bobby continued. She came to the hospital after working a 12-hour shift. Nate said nothing. She found a specialist my wife didn't know existed. She helped us understand the insurance appeal. When Emily lost her hair and refused to let her friends see her, Claire sat beside her for 3 hours and talked about everything except cancer. Nate stared at the photograph. He had never heard that story. Bobby's voice softened. My wife had a breakdown in the parking garage one night. You know who found her? Nate already knew the answer. Claire. Yeah. Bobby sat down. You sent a beautiful flower arrangement. Nate looked away. Claire remembered my daughter's birthday. The words landed harder than Bobby intended. Nate folded his arms. So, because Claire and I divorced, you're throwing away 15 years of business? No. Bobby's answer came immediately. I'm deciding what kind of business I want to keep doing. With me. Yes. Nate's face cooled. You think Claire wants this? I haven't spoken to Claire since before the divorce. Nate did not believe him. Bobby saw it. That's the part you still don't understand. He pushed the contract across the desk. Unsigned. She didn't ask me to do anything. Then why are you doing it? Bobby looked at the photograph again. Because I have granddaughters now. Nate waited. And one day they're going to ask what kind of man their grandfather was. That has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with who I stand beside. Nate's jaw tightened. You're choosing Claire. Bobby slowly shook his head. No. Then he looked Nate directly in the eyes. I'm choosing myself. For the first time in years, Nate Whitmore had no answer ready. He left without the contract. Outside, the winter air felt sharper than before. His driver opened the Mercedes door. Nate paused. Across the street, workers unloaded pallets from a truck with Dawson Freight written along the side. Life was continuing, just without him at the center of it. On the drive back to Manhattan, Nate opened his iPhone and searched Claire's name through old Foundation emails. Hundreds appeared. Hospital assistants, funeral arrangements, school supplies, medical referrals, emergency rent, scholarship requests. Names he barely recognized. Claire had been everywhere, quietly, no press release, no photographs, no demand for recognition. Nate stared through the tinted window at the Manhattan skyline and felt something unfamiliar move beneath his anger. Fear. That evening, another email arrived. A major Fifth Avenue charity gala had revised its seating plan. Nate was still invited. Vanessa was no longer seated at the head table. And for the first time, Nate understood that people were not simply angry about his divorce. They were beginning to decide what the Whitmore name meant without Claire standing beside it. He had always believed his money was the reason people stayed. Now he was discovering that the one thing money had never purchased was the reason they were leaving. Nate Whitmore hated empty chairs. They were too honest. At the Plaza Hotel, everything had been designed to suggest power. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across the grand ballroom. Champagne moved through the room on silver trays. Men in tailored tuxedos stood beside women in Dior, Oscar de la Renta, and Carolina Herrera. A row of black Mercedes sedans waited outside beneath the Manhattan lights. This was the kind of room Nate understood. For years, rooms like this had confirmed who he was. Important, respected, untouchable. Tonight was supposed to prove that nothing had changed. The Whitmore Community Foundation's annual winter gala had been scheduled months earlier. Nate could have postponed it after the divorce. Vanessa refused. If we cancel now, people will think we're hiding, she said. So they did the opposite. They made the evening bigger. Vanessa approved new floral arrangements, a larger media wall, additional press access, and an upgraded donor reception. She arrived in a deep red gown with diamonds at her ears and the Cartier watch Nate had recently given her. When she stepped from the Mercedes beside him, photographers immediately raised their cameras. Vanessa smiled. Nate did too. For a few seconds, it looked exactly like victory. Then they entered the ballroom. Nate noticed the first empty table before Vanessa did. Table 12. 6 seats. Only 2 occupied. He kept walking. At table 19, a hospital executive who had attended every year for nearly a decade was missing. At the front of the room, Dr. Maggie Lawson's usual chair remained empty. Vanessa leaned toward Nate. Traffic. Nate looked at her. Maggie doesn't blame traffic for anything. Vanessa's smile tightened. A waiter offered champagne. Nate took one glass but did not drink. As they moved through the room, people greeted him politely. Too politely. A banker shook his hand, then excused himself before Nate could start a conversation. A real estate attorney who usually stayed close to Whitmore donors spent most of the evening across the ballroom. Two board members spoke warmly to Vanessa but avoided photographs. The difference was subtle. That made it worse. No one was attacking Nate. They were simply creating distance. Vanessa saw it too. "Stop watching, everyone," she whispered. "I'm not." "You are." Nate turned toward her. "Half the people who promised to attend aren't here. Then we focus on the people who are." It sounded confident, but Vanessa checked her iPhone immediately afterward. Claire, meanwhile, was nearly 8 miles away. She sat in her temporary apartment wearing loose gray pants and one of Daniel Morgan's old FDNY sweatshirts. There was no television on, no gala livestream, no champagne. Her evening consisted of herbal tea, a blood pressure monitor, and a Kindle resting beside her on the couch. Dr. Maggie Lawson had warned her that afternoon. No stress tonight. Claire had smiled. "I'm divorced from the stress." Maggie had not laughed. "Your blood pressure disagrees." So Claire stayed home. She had no idea what was happening at the plaza. Back in the ballroom, dinner ended and Vanessa stepped onto the stage. This was the moment she had been preparing for. She stood beneath the glowing Whitmore Community Foundation logo and looked out at several hundred guests. "Tonight," she began, "we honor the future." Her voice was smooth, professional. She spoke about healthcare programs, education, children, and community partnerships. Nate watched from the front table. Vanessa was good. That had always been part of the attraction. She made complicated things sound controlled. Then she made one mistake. A reporter near the stage raised a hand during the brief media portion. "Will Claire Whitmore continue working with the foundation?" The room changed. Not visibly. But Nate felt it. Vanessa paused. She could have said the matter was private. She could have said Claire's future role had not been decided. Instead, Vanessa smiled. "Claire has chosen a more private life, and we respect that decision." Nate's eyes moved toward her. Wrong answer. A woman seated near the back whispered something to her husband. A physician shook his head. The reporter followed up. Was that her choice? Vanessa's smile remained in place. "Tonight is about the foundation." The clip was online before dessert. Someone posted it with a simple caption. "A private life?" Another person replied, "Claire Whitmore spent 3 nights helping my sister get into a maternal care program when nobody from the foundation office called us back." Then another comment appeared. "Mrs. Whitmore paid for my father's funeral when I was 24. She asked us not to tell anyone." Then another. "She remembered my son's name 5 years after his surgery." Within an hour, the conversation had shifted. Not viral in the dramatic sense. No millions of views. Something more dangerous for Nate. Locale. Specific. Believable. Real people attaching real memories to Claire's name. Vanessa sat beside Nate after her speech and checked her phone. Her face changed. "What?" "Nothing." Nate held out his hand. "Give it to me." She hesitated. That was enough. Nate took the phone. He scrolled. One story. Then another. Then another. A nurse. A retired firefighter. A school counselor. A widow. A mother whose child had needed surgery. None of them praised Whitmore Development. None praised Nate. They praised Claire. Nate looked around the ballroom again. The empty chairs no longer looked accidental. For years he had believed these people came because of him, because of his donations, his buildings, his influence, his name. Now he wondered whether Claire had been standing between that name and what people truly thought of the man carrying it. Vanessa touched his arm. "We can fix this." Nate looked at her. "How?" "We control the narrative." He almost believed her. Across Queens, Claire turned a page on her Kindle and shifted on the couch. A sudden tightness moved through her lower abdomen. She stopped, waited. It passed. Claire looked at the clock. Then another cramp came. Stronger. She placed both hands over her belly. "Easy," she whispered. The baby moved. Claire stood carefully and walked toward the bathroom. That was when she saw the blood. Her breath disappeared. She grabbed her iPhone and called Maggie. "Maggie." Claire's voice trembled. "I'm bleeding." At the plaza, Nate was still staring at Vanessa's phone when his own began to ring. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the name on the screen. Dr. Margaret Lawson. For the first time that night, Nate stopped thinking about empty chairs, donors, and headlines, because the one call he could not afford to miss was about the wife he had already chosen to lose. Nate answered Dr. Margaret Lawson's call before the second ring. Maggie? Her voice was controlled, but not calm. Claire is on her way to the hospital. The noise of the plaza disappeared around him. What happened? She started bleeding. For 1 second, Nate forgot how to breathe. Vanessa was still beside him, surrounded by crystal glasses, camera flashes, and the soft murmur of donors pretending not to watch. Nate stood so quickly, his chair scraped across the floor. Is the baby? We don't know yet. That was enough. He walked away from the table. Vanessa followed. Nate, where are you going? He did not answer. Nate! He stopped near the ballroom doors. Claire's in the hospital. Vanessa's expression changed. Concern appeared first. Then calculation. The press is still here. Nate stared at her. For the first time all evening, Vanessa looked small. I don't care. You can't just disappear in the middle of the gala. I said I don't care. He handed his champagne glass to a passing waiter and left. 20 minutes later, his Mercedes stopped outside New York Presbyterian Hospital. Nate entered through the main lobby still wearing his tuxedo. His bow tie was loose. His phone had 23 unread messages. He ignored everyone. Upstairs, Claire had already been admitted. The doctors suspected placenta previa with a small bleed. The baby's heartbeat was strong, but Claire needed monitoring, medication, and absolute rest. Nothing was guaranteed. That was the phrase Nate hated most. Nothing was guaranteed. Money guaranteed reservations. It guaranteed private rooms. It guaranteed lawyers answered at midnight. It guaranteed drivers waited outside in freezing rain, but it could not guarantee that his son would be safe. Nate reached the maternity floor and saw Daniel Morgan standing near the nurse's station. Claire's father wore jeans, work boots, and an old FDNY jacket. He looked nothing like the men Nate usually dealt with. No tailored suit. No security. No expensive watch. Just a father who had arrived when his daughter called. Nate approached him. Daniel. Daniel looked at him. His face did not change. How is she? Scared. And the baby? Stable for now. Nate nodded. I need to see her. Daniel did not move. She doesn't want visitors. I'm not a visitor. Daniel's eyes hardened. You signed papers 2 days ago saying otherwise. The words hit harder than Nate expected. She's carrying my son. Yes. Then move. Daniel stepped closer. Not threatening. Not afraid. She needed you long before tonight. Nate said nothing. Daniel continued. She needed you when she was getting injections every morning. Nate looked away. She needed you after the miscarriage. Daniel. She needed you when she was lying awake, wondering why the man who promised her a family suddenly preferred another woman. Nate's jaw tightened. Daniel's voice stayed quiet. She needed you before there was blood. Then he walked away. Nate remained in the hallway. For once, nobody moved because he wanted them to. A nurse came through the double doors. Mr. Whitmore? Yes. Mrs. Whitmore asked that you remain outside for now. Mrs. Whitmore. The name almost sounded cruel. Can I at least know what's happening? The baby's heart rate is reassuring. The bleeding appears to be slowing. We're monitoring both of them. Nate nodded. Tell her I'm here. The nurse hesitated. I think she knows. Then she left. Nate sat alone. Hours passed. His tuxedo jacket ended up folded beside him. His Rolex read 2:14 a.m. Then Dreisechs. Then 4:31. He did not leave. Through a narrow window in the door, he eventually saw Claire. She lay beneath a white hospital blanket, one hand resting over her stomach. A fetal monitor blinked beside her. She looked smaller than Nate remembered. For the first time since the divorce, anger left him completely. He remembered the bathroom floor years ago. Claire crying after another failed IVF cycle. He remembered holding her face and saying, "You are my family." He had meant it then. That was the worst part. He had not always been lying. Somewhere between then and now, he had simply become a man who believed he could betray that promise and still keep everything else. Inside the room, Claire could not sleep. The steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat filled the darkness. She stared at the monitor until the numbers blurred through her tears. Maggie sat beside her. Claire whispered, "I don't care about the divorce anymore." Maggie took her hand. "I know. I don't care about Vanessa. I know. I don't care what happens to the foundation." Claire's voice broke. "I just want him safe." Maggie squeezed her fingers. "The heartbeat is strong." Claire began crying harder. 6 years. 6 years of appointments, needles, hope, loss, and pretending she was fine. She had survived betrayal. She could survive humiliation. But the idea of losing this child was different. I can't lose him. You're not losing him tonight. Maggie's voice was firm. Outside the room, Nate heard nothing. He only saw Claire crying. He stood and placed one hand against the door. He wanted to enter. He wanted to tell her he was sorry. He wanted to promise things he no longer had the right to promise. But he stayed outside. At sunrise, the doctor finally stepped into the hallway. The bleeding has stopped. Nate closed his eyes. The baby? Strong heartbeat. We're keeping Claire here for observation, but right now both are stable. Nate exhaled. His legs almost gave way. Before leaving to change clothes, he asked a nurse to give Claire a small bag. Inside was a blue baby blanket. Claire recognized it immediately. She and Nate had bought it together after their 20-week ultrasound. She pressed the fabric against her face and cried again. But she did not call him. Across town, Vanessa opened a news alert showing Nate leaving the hospital just after dawn. She stared at the photograph. And for the first time since winning him, Vanessa understood something she had never planned for. Nate had chosen her in court, but when Claire was in danger, he had abandoned an entire ballroom without thinking twice, and Vanessa suddenly realized she might have won the man without ever truly replacing the wife. Claire was discharged from the hospital 3 days later with strict instructions. Bed rest. No lifting. No unnecessary travel. No stress. Dr. Margaret Lawson repeated the last one twice while standing beside Claire's hospital bed. Claire gave her a tired smile. I'm beginning to think everyone believes stress is something I can cancel like a dinner reservation. Maggie did not smile back. I'm serious. I know. Daniel Morgan drove Claire home to the temporary apartment in Queens. He carried her overnight bag upstairs, checked the refrigerator, replaced a burned-out kitchen bulb without being asked, then stood near the door with the uncomfortable expression of a father trying not to hover. You call me if you need anything. I will. Anything. Claire nodded. Daniel pointed toward her phone. I mean before you try handling it yourself. That finally made her smile. After he left, the apartment became quiet again. Claire lowered herself onto the couch. A glass of water sat beside the blood pressure cuff. Her Kindle was on the coffee table. The blue baby blanket Nate had sent from the hospital remained folded inside her bag. She had not decided what to do with it. Part of her wanted to return it. Another part remembered choosing it with Nate at a Fifth Avenue baby store after their 20-week ultrasound. They had argued over colors. Nate wanted gray. Claire wanted blue. He had laughed and surrendered. That memory belonged to her too. She refused to let Vanessa erase every good thing simply because the marriage had ended badly. The doorbell rang shortly after 11. Claire frowned. Daniel had a key. Maggie always called first. She checked the small security screen beside the door. Vanessa Caldwell stood in the hallway holding white flowers and a pale blue gift bag. Claire stared at the screen. For several seconds, she considered doing nothing. Then Vanessa pressed the bell again. Claire opened the door but did not step aside. Vanessa looked polished even at midday. Camel-colored wool coat, soft makeup, leather handbag, no red gala gown, no cameras. I heard you were home. Claire's expression remained neutral. How? Nate mentioned it. Of course he had. Vanessa lifted the flowers slightly. I came to see how you're doing. Claire looked at them. You came to my apartment. I know this is awkward. That's one word for it. Vanessa lowered her voice. I don't want us to keep hurting each other. Claire almost laughed. Instead, she looked directly at her. I wasn't aware I was hurting you. Vanessa's smile tightened. I mean the situation. The situation has names. Silence. Nate. Claire. Vanessa. The baby. Vanessa looked down briefly. I know you probably hate me. I don't know you well enough to hate you. That answer unsettled Vanessa more than anger would have. Claire finally stepped aside. 5 minutes. Vanessa entered. Her eyes moved around the modest apartment. No marble foyer. No private elevator. No Manhattan skyline. Boxes of baby supplies sat beside the wall. A folded stroller waited near the dining table. Vanessa seemed surprised by how ordinary Claire's new life looked. Claire noticed. You expected something else? No, you did. Vanessa set the flowers down, then placed the gift bag on the table. It's for the baby. Claire did not touch it. Vanessa sat only after Claire did. For a moment neither woman spoke. Then Vanessa softened her voice. Nate was terrified the other night. Claire's fingers tightened around her water glass. That isn't something you need to explain to me. He left everything. I know. He didn't even think about the gala. Claire looked up. Now she understood why Vanessa was here. Not compassion. Fear. Vanessa wanted to know what Nate's reaction meant. Claire said quietly, "He is the baby's father." Vanessa nodded too quickly. "Of course. What did you think he would do?" "I didn't say anything." "You didn't have to." Vanessa looked away. Then she changed direction. "Nate wants to make sure the baby is protected." Claire became still. "How?" "He's been discussing a trust." That caught Claire's attention. Not because of the money, because custody and financial arrangements involving her son were supposed to go through attorneys. What trust? Vanessa hesitated. A family trust. For education, healthcare, future property. "I don't know the details." Claire studied her face. "You seem to know enough." Vanessa realized the mistake too late. "I work closely with Nate." "You work in communications." "I'm involved in more now." There it was. Not triumph exactly. Possession. Claire set down her glass. "Any arrangement involving my child goes through my attorney." "Of course." "And Nate knows that." Vanessa leaned forward. "I'm not trying to interfere. You came to the home of his pregnant ex-wife, brought a present for her child, and started discussing a trust that my own lawyer hasn't mentioned." Vanessa's expression hardened. "I was trying to be kind." "No." Claire's voice remained calm. "You were trying to find out whether Nate running to the hospital changed anything." Vanessa froze. Claire continued. "It didn't." "You're certain?" "Yes." "Nate still cares about you." Claire's throat tightened, but she refused to show it. "He may." Vanessa looked surprised. Claire continued. "People can care about someone and still destroy what they built with them." That landed between them. Vanessa stood. "I should go." "Yes." She reached for her handbag. Claire looked at the gift bag. "Take that with you. It's for the baby. My son does not need a gift from the woman who helped break his home." Vanessa's face flushed. For the first time, the polished mask slipped. "I didn't force Nate to leave you." Claire nodded. "No, he made that choice." Vanessa looked almost relieved. Then Claire added, "And one day you may learn that a man who can make that choice once can make it again." Vanessa stared at her, then left without another word. Claire locked the door. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from what Vanessa had revealed, the trust, the private financial discussions, the fact that Vanessa was already inside conversations involving Claire's unborn child. Claire picked up her iPhone and called her attorney. "I need every proposed trust, custody document, and financial arrangement involving my baby sent directly to you." Her lawyer paused. "Did something happen?" Claire looked toward the closed door. "Yes." Across Manhattan, Nate was reviewing financing documents for a Park Avenue project when another email appeared. A lender wanted an additional reputational risk review before moving forward. Nate frowned. Then his assistant stepped inside. "Vanessa just called." "What does she want?" She said it's personal. At that exact moment, Vanessa sat in the back of a taxi, replaying Claire's final warning. A man who can make that choice once can make it again. She opened her phone, then opened a private message thread Nate had never seen. Vanessa had gone to Claire's apartment, hoping to protect her place beside Nate. Instead, she had revealed how deeply she had already entered his private affairs, and Claire had just realized the woman who stole her husband might be preparing to control much more than his heart. Claire expected the next few days to be quiet. They were not. She stayed home under strict medical instructions, moving carefully between the couch, the kitchen, and the bedroom, while her pregnancy entered its final weeks. Her father stopped by every morning. Dr. Maggie Lawson called twice a day. Her attorney handled the documents concerning the baby. Claire tried to stay away from everything connected to Nate, but the world Nate had built kept finding its way back to her. The first surprise arrived in a plain cardboard box. No luxury ribbon, no expensive logo, just an ordinary delivery left outside her apartment. Claire opened it at the kitchen table. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Some were handwritten, others were printed emails. One came from a retired schoolteacher in Queens. Another from a nurse Claire had worked with years earlier. A woman named Teresa wrote that Claire had once stayed beside her during a complicated delivery when Teresa's husband was trapped at work during a snowstorm. A man named George said Claire had helped his mother understand hospice care. A former Whitmore construction employee wrote that Claire had attended his wife's funeral after Nate sent flowers but could not come himself. Claire read slowly, then more slowly. Her eyes filled. She had forgotten half the things people remembered. One letter made her stop completely. It came from a woman named Evelyn Price. Years earlier, Evelyn's teenage son had needed emergency surgery. Claire had stayed after her shift to help the frightened mother understand what doctors were saying. Evelyn wrote, "You remembered my son's name when everyone else called him. The boy in room 414. Claire covered her mouth. Tears fell onto the paper. She had spent months believing she had failed. Failed her marriage. Failed to recognize Nate's betrayal sooner. Failed to protect the family she had waited so long to build. But these letters told a different story. Her life had mattered in places she had never measured. The phone rang. It was Maggie. "You received the box?" Claire looked at the letters. "You did this?" "No." "Then who?" "Bobby Dawson started collecting messages after people heard you were sick." Claire closed her eyes. "Maggie, I don't want anyone fighting Nate for me." "They're not." "Maggie, they're telling you what you meant to them." Claire looked around the table. "That feels like the same thing right now." "No." Maggie's voice remained gentle. "Revenge asks people to hurt someone. Gratitude asks them to remember." Claire said nothing. Across Manhattan, Nate was learning the same lesson in a much harsher way. Bobby Dawson had requested another meeting. Nate almost refused. Then Bobby added 2 words to the message. Important. Personal. They met at a quiet steakhouse near Midtown, away from cameras and Whitmore employees. Bobby did not order alcohol. Neither did Nate. "I heard about Claire," Bobby said. "She's stable." "And the baby?" "Stable too." Bobby nodded. "That's good." Nate waited. "You didn't ask me here to discuss Claire's health." "No." Bobby reached into his coat and removed a folder. He placed it on the table. "What is that?" "A formal notice." Nate opened it. Dawson Freight would not renew its exclusive transportation agreement with Whitmore Development. Nate looked up. "You're serious?" "Yes." "You're walking away from millions." "I know. You think someone else will give you our volume?" "Maybe not." "Then this is stupidity." Bobby leaned back. "Maybe." Nate stared at him. "You're punishing me." "No." "For Claire." "No." "Then explain it." Bobby's expression hardened. "I already did." Nate said nothing. Bobby continued. "I spent 15 years telling myself business was business, that what you did outside contracts wasn't my concern. And now? Now I have granddaughters." Nate frowned. Bobby looked directly at him. "I want to be able to tell them that when I finally saw the difference between loyalty and fear, I chose correctly." Nate's jaw tightened. "You think I scare you?" "No." Bobby's answer came immediately. "That's the problem. I stopped being scared." He stood. Nate remained seated. "Claire didn't ask you to do this." "No." "You haven't spoken to her?" "Not once." Bobby placed cash beside his untouched water glass. "This is my decision." Then he left. Nate stared at the unsigned contract until the waiter quietly approached. He left without finishing lunch. Back at the Whitmore Community Foundation, another resignation waited. Father Michael Brennan had withdrawn from the annual Community Advisory Council. Then a local pediatric clinic requested its new sponsorship agreement be reviewed independently. On by on. No coordination. No leader. No public campaign. That frightened Nate more than organized opposition ever could. He could negotiate with enemies. He could pressure contractors. He could hire lawyers. But how did a man fight hundreds of private decisions being made by people who simply no longer wanted his name beside theirs? That evening, Claire returned to the box of letters. At the bottom she noticed one envelope she had missed. Unlike the others, it had no return address. Inside was not a thank you letter. It was a printed document. Claire read the heading twice. Post-Whitmore Leadership Positioning. Her stomach tightened. The document appeared to be a draft proposal from a private public relations firm. The prospective client was not Nate. It was Vanessa Caldwell. Claire turned the page. Media strategy. Personal brand separation. Independent board relationships. Contingency planning in the event Nathaniel Whitmore loses executive authority. Claire stopped reading. Vanessa had not simply prepared for Nate's success. She was preparing for his fall. Claire reached for her iPhone, then stopped. For several seconds, she considered calling Nate, warning him, doing what she had done throughout their marriage, protecting him from dangers he did not see. Her thumb hovered over his name. Then Claire remembered the courtroom. Yes, the Mont Blanc pen. His signature. You chose her. Claire slowly locked the phone. For the first time in 8 years, Nate Whitmore would have to recognize betrayal without Claire standing beside him to explain where it was coming from. And while Nate was still blaming Claire for everyone walking away, The woman he had chosen over his family was already building a future designed to survive without him. Nate Whitmore found the first crack in Vanessa Caldwell's loyalty inside a folder she never intended him to see. It happened late on a Tuesday evening. Whitmore Development's Park Avenue offices were almost empty. The cleaning staff had already moved through the executive floor, and the Manhattan skyline reflected against the glass walls like a second city floating in darkness. Nate sat alone at the conference table with his MacBook Pro open in front of him. 3 financing partners wanted updated risk disclosures. 2 board members had requested private meetings. A Fifth Avenue development project had been pushed into another review cycle. None of it was fatal, but everything was slower, more cautious, more expensive. For the first time in years, Nate could feel people calculating what it might cost to remain close to him. Vanessa entered, carrying her iPad. "You're still here. So are you?" She smiled and set the tablet beside him. "I'm trying to clean up the mess." Nate looked at her. "What mess?" She hesitated. "The media attention, the foundation, the donor issues. The divorce?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't need to." Vanessa sat across from him. For weeks, Nate had admired the way she handled pressure. Tonight, something about her felt different. She kept checking her phone. She avoided his eyes. And when Nate mentioned a private dinner with 2 board members, Vanessa immediately asked who would attend. Not casually, carefully. "Why?" "I should know who's making decisions." "About the company?" "About everything." Nate leaned back. "You work for the foundation." Vanessa's expression tightened. "I've done a lot more than communications for you." There was truth in that. Nate had allowed Vanessa into conversations she never should have heard. Strategy, donor relationships, private financial planning, even early discussions about a trust for his unborn son. At the time, it had felt natural. Claire had become distant. Vanessa had become available. Now Nate wondered whether availability had been the point. Vanessa stood. "I'm going home." She gathered her things too quickly. A folder slipped from beneath her iPad and fell onto the carpet. Several pages scattered. Vanessa froze. Nate bent down before she could stop him. The heading on the first page caught his attention. Post-Whitmore Leadership Positioning. He read it once. Then again. Vanessa reached for the document. "Nate, give me that." He moved it away. "What is this?" "It's nothing. It has your name on it." Her face changed. "Nate." He turned the page. Independent media strategy. Personal brand protection. Relationship development with selected board members. Contingency planning in the event Nathaniel Whitmore loses executive authority. The room became very quiet. Nate looked up. "You hired a PR firm." Vanessa said nothing. "To prepare for me losing control." "That is not what this is." "It says exactly that. It's contingency planning." "For who?" "For us." Nate laughed once. There was no humor in it. "Our future?" "Yes." "Or yours?" Vanessa stared at him. That pause answered more than anything she could have said. Nate stood. "How long?" "It was only preliminary." "How long?" "A few weeks." "Before or after the divorce?" Vanessa looked away. Nate's voice dropped. "Before?" "I needed to understand what could happen. You were preparing your exit before I signed the papers." "I was protecting myself." The words landed hard. Vanessa realized it immediately. She stepped closer. "You have to understand the position I'm in." Nate stared at her. "What position?" "People won't return my calls." "That bothers you?" "Of course it bothers me." "A month ago, you said none of that mattered." "A month ago, we weren't being pushed out of rooms." There it was. Not love. Not loyalty. Access. Status. Proximity to power. Nate looked at the woman he had chosen in court and finally saw something familiar in her. Himself. For years, he had treated relationships like transactions. What could a person offer? What could they protect? What would make them stay? Now Vanessa was measuring him by the same rules. And suddenly, he hated those rules. "You should leave." Vanessa blinked. "Nate, go." "You're angry." "Yes." "You're not thinking clearly." He almost smiled. Claire had heard those exact words from him in different forms. Too emotional. Too sensitive. Pregnancy hormones. For the first time, Nate understood how cruel it sounded when someone used calm language to deny another person's reality. Vanessa reached for his arm. He stepped back. That frightened her. "I love you." Nate looked down at the documents. "Would you still love me if none of these people returned my calls?" Vanessa's mouth opened. No answer came. Nate closed the folder. Go home. Vanessa left. The doors shut behind her. Nate remained standing in the empty boardroom. For several minutes, he did nothing. Then he picked up his phone. Claire's name was still near the top of his recent calls. He stared at it. He thought about the hospital, the letters people had written, Bobby Dawson walking away from millions, Claire refusing to attack him even when she could have. For the first time, Nate wanted to speak to her without defending himself. The next afternoon, he drove to Queens alone. No security, no assistant, no Vanessa. Claire met him in the lobby of her apartment building. She wore a loose sweater over her pregnant belly and looked tired but stronger. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you. About Ethan? They had not officially chosen the baby's name yet, but Claire had begun using Ethan privately. No. Claire waited. Nate swallowed. I made a mistake. Her eyes did not soften. No, Nate. He looked at her. You made choices. I know. No, I don't think you do. Nate took a breath. I want to fix this. Claire's expression changed slightly. Would you be standing here if Vanessa still made you feel powerful? He said nothing. Claire nodded. That's what I thought. I still care about you. I believe you. That answer surprised him. Claire continued. But caring about someone does not undo what you chose to do to them. Nate looked toward the elevator. Is there any chance after the baby comes? Claire's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. You can still become a good father. He waited. You will never be my husband again. The words were gentle. Final. Nate lowered his head. Then he left. When he returned to the Upper East Side townhouse that night, the first thing he noticed was the silence. Vanessa's coat was gone. Her suitcase was gone. The bathroom counter was empty. So was the drawer where she kept the Cartier watch. Nate stood in the bedroom and understood. Vanessa had not waited to be abandoned. She had chosen herself. But on the nightstand, she had left behind one thing. A copied set of confidential Whitmore Foundation emails, and beside them was a note with only 4 words. You should have listened. Nate thought Vanessa leaving was the betrayal. He had no idea she had taken something far more dangerous than jewelry, and by morning, the empire he was already struggling to hold together would face a threat from inside its own walls. By 7 the next morning, Nate Whitmore had stopped thinking about Vanessa as a woman who had left him. She had become a liability. He sat alone in the study of the Upper East Side townhouse, with the copied emails spread across his desk. Some were harmless. Meeting schedules, donor updates, foundation budgets. Others were not. Several showed internal discussions about how Whitmore Community Foundation money had been used to support events that also benefited Whitmore Development's public image. Nothing on the pages immediately proved a crime. But Nate knew enough about newspapers, regulators, and frightened board members to understand the danger. Facts did not have to be illegal to become devastating when placed under the right headline. His attorney, Martin Cole, arrived before 8. Gray suit, no tie, MacBook Pro under one arm. He read the documents without speaking. Finally, he looked at Nate. How much did she take? I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Martin leaned back. Did Vanessa have authorized access to these files? Some. And the rest? Nate said nothing. Martin understood. You gave her access outside her role. I trusted her. Martin's expression did not change. That sentence sounded pathetic even to Nate. His iPhone rang. Vanessa. Martin held out a hand. Speaker. Nate answered. Where are you? Vanessa's voice was calm. Somewhere you can't send people to intimidate me. Nate looked at Martin. I'm not sending anyone. I know how your family works. You seemed comfortable with my family when you wanted a seat beside me. Silence. Then Vanessa said, I want protection. From what? From being blamed when this falls apart. Nate's jaw tightened. What do you want? A settlement. Martin shook his head immediately. Nate ignored him. For what? My silence. There it was. No romance left. No apologies. No memories of hotel rooms, gala dinners, or whispered promises. Just a price. Nate almost laughed. He had spent years believing every person eventually revealed what they cost. Now Vanessa was proving his philosophy perfectly. He hated her for it. How much? Martin wrote on a legal pad. Do not negotiate. Vanessa named a number. Nate stared at the wall. You think I'm paying you millions because you copied emails? I think you're paying me because you know what happens if someone starts asking why a charity paid for certain events that benefited your business relationships. They were approved. Then you have nothing to worry about. The line stayed quiet. Vanessa continued. I don't want to destroy you, Nate. You just want to be paid not to. I want a future. You had one. No, I had yours. For some reason, that sentence hurt more than the demand. Nate ended the call. Martin immediately began issuing instructions. Preserve every email. Lock former employee access. Notify the foundation board. Bring in outside counsel. Hire an independent forensic review team. No deleting. No threats. No private cleanup. For once, Nate did not argue. By noon, the Whitmore Community Foundation had formally opened an internal governance review. By 3, 2 board members requested Nate temporarily step back from foundation decisions until the review was complete. By 5, a business reporter had called Whitmore Development asking whether the divorce, leadership changes, and foundation concerns were connected. Nate stood in his Park Avenue office reading the request. His assistant asked, "Do we deny everything?" "No." She looked surprised. "What should I say?" "Say the foundation is conducting an independent review and will cooperate fully." The words tasted foreign. Cooperate. Independent. Review. Nate was used to controlling rooms. Now he was learning how quickly control disappeared once people stopped accepting his version of events automatically. Across Queens, Claire was feeding herself soup at the kitchen table when her phone rang. A reporter. She almost ignored it. Then she answered. "Mrs. Whitmore, we're preparing a story regarding governance concerns at the Whitmore Community Foundation. Were you aware of any misuse of charitable funds?" Claire's hand stopped. "No." "Did Mr. Whitmore ever ask you to approve foundation activity that benefited his private business?" "No." "Do you believe Vanessa Caldwell has credible information?" "I have no idea." "Do you have any comment about Mr. Whitmore personally?" Claire looked toward the nursery corner. A folded bassinet waited beside the wall. Her son would be born into whatever she helped create next. She could attack Nate. She could say he lied, cheated, humiliated her in court. Nobody would blame her. Instead, Claire said, "I'm focused on my health and my baby. I won't comment on an investigation I'm not part of." The reporter tried again. "Are you defending him?" "No." "Then why not speak?" Claire paused. "Because telling the truth is different from using someone's worst moment as a weapon." She ended the call. That evening, Nate read the article online. One sentence stopped him. Claire Whitmore declined to comment on her former husband's conduct. That was all. No accusation. No revenge. No humiliation. Nate leaned back in his chair. He understood exactly what Claire could have said, and understood even more clearly that she had chosen not to. Vanessa had taken private information and demanded money. Claire had been handed a microphone and walked away from it. For the first time, Nate saw the difference between the two women, without desire, ego, or power getting in the way. Then his laptop chimed. An emergency message from Whitmore Development's board. Mandatory meeting. $8 million. Attendance required. Nate opened the attached agenda. Reputational risk. Lender concerns. Executive authority. Temporary leadership options. His stomach tightened. The company was not bankrupt. His assets had not vanished. But the board was preparing to discuss something Nate had once considered impossible. Whether Whitmore Development was safer without Whitmore controlling it? Vanessa had tried to sell Nate's secrets. Claire had refused to sell his humiliation. And by morning, the people who once depended on his name would decide whether that name had become the company's greatest liability. At 7:42 the next morning, Nate Whitmore stepped out of the private elevator on the 36th floor of Whitmore Development Group and immediately knew the meeting had changed before it began. Nobody rushed toward him. Normally, assistants appeared with coffee, updated schedules, and whispered reminders before he reached the boardroom. Today, the hallway was quiet. His executive assistant stood near the glass doors holding an iPad against her chest. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was careful. Too careful. Nate looked past her. Inside the boardroom, 10 people were already seated. The long walnut table reflected the pale Manhattan morning. MacBook Pros were open. Printed folders were arranged beside bottles of water. A financial news ticker moved silently across a wall-mounted screen. At the far end sat David Mercer, Whitmore Development's lead independent director. 63. Former investment banker. The kind of man Nate had once considered useful because he rarely challenged him in public. Today, David did not stand when Nate entered. Neither did anyone else. Nate took his usual chair at the head of the table. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then David folded his hands. "Thank you for coming. Nate almost laughed. It's my company. A few eyes dropped toward the table. David did not react. That is one of the subjects we need to discuss. Nate's expression hardened. His attorney, Martin Cole, sat 2 seats away. He gave Nate a subtle warning look. Stay calm. David opened a folder. We have 3 separate concerns. Nate leaned back. I've read the agenda. Then you know this isn't about your personal life. Nate glanced around the room. Everything happening right now is about my personal life. No, David said. That is what you keep telling yourself. The room went still. Nate stared at him. David continued. The divorce created attention. The foundation review created concern. But the actual issue is business risk. He turned toward the CFO. She slid a document forward. 2 lenders have requested revised covenants on the Park Avenue development. Nate looked down. Higher reserves. Additional reporting. More expensive financing. He felt irritation rise. They're overreacting. Maybe, the CFO said, but they're still doing it. Another board member spoke. A pension fund postponed its commitment to the Westchester project. Temporary. Maybe. The word again. Maybe. Nate hated it. David continued. 3 partners have requested reassurance that the foundation investigation will not expand into the company. It won't. You can't guarantee that. I know it's in my company. Martin finally spoke. Nate. A warning. Nate stopped. David folded his glasses and placed them on the table. This is not a criminal proceeding. Nobody is accusing you of fraud here. Then what exactly are you accusing me of? Becoming expensive. Nate blinked. David continued. Your name used to lower friction. It opened doors. It reassured investors. It brought partners into rooms. He paused. Right now, your name is doing the opposite. Nate felt something cold settle in his stomach. I built this company. Yes. With my relationships. Yes. With my money. Yes. Then remember who you're talking to. Several people shifted. David did not. That sentence is the reason we're here. Nate leaned forward. What does that mean? It means you still believe ownership and leadership are the same thing. Nate stared at him. They're not. David pushed a resolution across the table. Nate looked down. Temporary executive restructuring. Effective immediately. The board was proposing that Nate step aside from daily CEO duties while an interim chief executive handled operations during the foundation review and lender reassessment. He read the page twice. Then looked at Martin. You knew about this? I knew they were considering options. You didn't tell me? I told you last night they were discussing executive authority. Nate pushed the document away. No. David's voice remained calm. This is a board vote. My name is on the building. Yes. My family controls the largest voting block. Yes. So this is theater. No. The CFO spoke carefully. Your family holdings remain intact. Your ownership is not being taken. David nodded. You are not losing your shares. Another pause. You are losing operational authority. That sentence hurt more. Nate stood. You think you can run Whitmore without me? David looked up. We think Whitmore may not survive the next 6 months if every lender, investor, hospital partner, and contractor has to calculate your personal instability into every decision. Nate's jaw clenched. You're afraid of bad press. We're afraid of what staying beside you costs us. The room became silent. The same idea Bobby had expressed. The same idea Maggie had acted on. The same idea spreading through Nate's life. Cost. Not fear of him. Cost of association. Nate slowly sat back down. The vote began. Un by one. Yes. 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 One abstention. Another yes. Martin did not vote. Nate watched people he had promoted, rewarded, and defended choose to reduce his power. Nobody shouted. Nobody celebrated. That made it worse. Within 20 minutes, the resolution passed. Effective immediately. Nate would remain chairman in a limited capacity, while an interim CEO assumed daily control. His email access would remain. His office would remain. His ownership would remain. But major contracts, financing decisions, executive hires, and public statements would now require additional approval. A king with a title. No kingdom under his hand. The meeting ended at 9:18. People collected their laptops and left quietly. Nate remained seated. Through the windows, Manhattan looked exactly the same. Yellow taxis moved below. Construction cranes turned. Markets opened. Nobody outside knew that the man at the head of Whitmore Development had just lost the power to lead it. Martin stayed behind. You need to go home. Nate stared at the empty chairs. I still own more of this company than anyone in this room. I know. They can't take that from me. No. Nate looked at him. Then why does it feel like they already did? Martin had no answer that would help. Across Queens, Claire was meeting by video call with the director of a maternal health nonprofit. The organization wanted to discuss a new outreach center for pregnant women facing housing insecurity, domestic instability, or limited healthcare access. Claire listened carefully. For the first time in years, someone was speaking to her about work that had nothing to do with being Mrs. Whitmore. No donor dinner, no gala, no husband's reputation. Her experience, her judgment, her name. When the call ended, Claire closed her MacBook Air and rested one hand over her belly. The baby moved. She smiled. Then her phone rang. Maggie. Claire answered. Maggie? I need you to stay calm. Claire's smile disappeared. What happened? It's not bad yet. Maggie. Your latest monitoring results concern me. I want you at the hospital this afternoon. Claire looked down at her stomach. Is the baby okay? I want to make sure he stays that way. At Whitmore Development, Nate was still sitting alone when his phone began vibrating across the boardroom table. He looked at the screen. Dr. Margaret Lawson. His entire body went cold. He answered immediately. Maggie? Her voice was urgent. Claire is coming back to the hospital. Nate closed his eyes. Only minutes earlier, he had thought losing the company's authority was the worst thing that could happen to him. He was about to learn how wrong he was, because while Nate was staring at the empty chair of the CEO he used to be, the only two people he still truly loved were heading toward a hospital room where no amount of money, ownership, or power could guarantee what happened next. Claire was 35 weeks and 4 days pregnant when the contractions began. They started as pressure, then tightening, then pain. By the time Daniel Morgan pulled his old Ford into the hospital entrance, Claire was gripping the door handle with both hands and trying not to panic. Dr. Maggie Lawson was waiting inside. You did the right thing coming in. Claire nodded, breathless. Is he too early? Not dangerously early, but we need to watch both of you. The nurses moved quickly. Monitor straps were placed around Claire's belly. A blood pressure cuff tightened around her arm. The room filled with the steady electronic rhythm of Ethan's heartbeat. Claire stared at the screen. She had heard that sound hundreds of times during appointments. Tonight, it felt like the only sound in the world that mattered. Daniel stood beside the bed. You want me to stay? Claire managed a weak smile. You hate hospitals. I hate bad coffee. Hospitals are fine. She almost laughed. Then another contraction hit. Daniel took her hand. Across Manhattan, Nate was still in the boardroom when Maggie called. He had just lost operational control of Whitmore Development. For 20 minutes, he had sat staring at the polished table where the vote had happened. Then his phone rang. Claire is in labor, Maggie said. Nate stood immediately. How early? 35 weeks. Is the baby okay? Right now, yes. Right now. Nate hated those words. He left the office without changing his clothes. No assistant, no security detail, no board members. He drove himself. Traffic on the FDR felt impossible. His hands tightened around the steering wheel every time a light changed. For years, Nate had believed power meant making people wait for him. Tonight, every red light reminded him that life did not care who he was. When he reached the maternity floor, Daniel was standing outside Claire's room. The two men looked at each other. Nate stopped. How is she? In pain. And Ethan? Daniel's expression shifted. You know the name? Nate nodded. Claire mentioned it. Daniel said nothing. Nate looked toward the door. Does she want me here? Daniel answered carefully. That's up to her. A nurse stepped out. Mr. Whitmore? Yes. Claire knows you're here. Nate waited. The nurse looked at him. She hasn't decided whether she wants you in the room. Nate swallowed. Tell her. I'll stay outside. The nurse nodded. Inside, Claire heard every word through the partly open door. She closed her eyes. Another contraction came. Maggie stood on one side, Daniel on the other. Claire breathed through the pain. Then she whispered, Dad, I'm here. If I let him in, does that make me weak? Daniel looked at his daughter for a long moment. No. What if people think I forgave him? You're not doing this for people. Claire's eyes filled. I don't know what the right thing is. Daniel squeezed her hand. The right thing is whatever lets you meet your son without regret. That settled something. Claire asked the nurse to bring Nate in. When he entered, he looked different. Not physically. He still wore the same expensive shirt, though the collar was open now and the sleeves were rolled up. But the confidence was gone. He did not walk toward the bed until Claire nodded. "No business," she said. Nate stopped. "No, Vanessa." His face tightened. "No arguments. I understand." Claire looked directly at him. "Tonight, you are only Ethan's father." Nate nodded. "That's enough." It was the first humble thing Claire had heard him say in months. The next 3 hours stripped away everything unnecessary. There was no company, no board, no Whitmore name, no reputation. There was only pain, breathing, nurses, monitors. Claire squeezing Nate's hand hard enough to leave marks. At one point, she cried, "I can't do this." Nate leaned closer. "Yes, you can." She shook her head. "I'm tired." "I know." "You don't know." He went silent, then said quietly, "You're right." Claire looked at him. It was such a small thing, but Nate had finally stopped telling her what she felt. He simply stayed. Shortly before dawn, the doctor said it was time. The room became brighter. More nurses entered. Claire pushed. Nate stood beside her. Daniel waited outside. Maggie remained near the foot of the bed. Then suddenly, through exhaustion and fear, Claire heard a sound that broke something open inside her. A cry. Small, sharp, alive. Claire began sobbing before she even saw him. The nurse lifted the baby. "He's here." Nate covered his mouth. For the first time since Claire had known him, he looked completely defenseless. Ethan was placed against Claire's chest. Tinny, warm, breathing. His fingers opened and closed against her skin. Claire kissed the top of his head. "Hi, baby." Nate cried silently beside her. Claire looked at him. For one dangerous second, the room felt like the family they had once imagined. A mother, a father, a child. The sweetness was almost cruel. Nate touched Ethan's tiny foot. "He's perfect." Claire nodded. "He is." Later, when paperwork was brought in, the nurse asked for the full name. Claire answered, "Ethan Daniel Whitmore." Nate looked at her. "Daniel?" Claire turned toward the hallway, where her father stood watching through the glass. Then she looked back at Nate. "Because my father taught me what staying looks like." Nate lowered his eyes. He understood. Claire was not punishing him. She was naming the value she wanted her son to learn. Nate leaned closer to Ethan. "I'm going to do better." Claire's expression remained soft, but guarded. "Don't promise me." He looked at her. "Show him." Nate nodded. A few minutes later, the nurse carried Ethan for routine checks. Claire leaned back against the pillow, exhausted. Maggie sat beside her. "How do you feel?" Claire watched Nate through the glass as he stared at his son. She thought about the courtroom, the gala, the bleeding, the loneliness. Then she whispered one word. "Free." Maggie squeezed her hand. At that exact moment, Nate's phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. Then it vibrated again, and again. Finally, he looked. A breaking entertainment headline filled the screen. Vanessa Caldwell breaks silence on Whitmore scandal. Nate's face changed. Claire noticed. "What happened?" Nate hesitated, then turned the screen toward her. Vanessa had not simply sold a story about him. She had named Claire too, and before Claire had even spent her first full morning as Ethan's mother, the woman Nate had chosen in court had decided to attack the one thing Claire had left untouched, her integrity. Claire had been a mother for less than 12 hours when Vanessa Caldwell turned her into a headline. The story appeared before breakfast. By 8 in the morning, clips were circulating across local news sites, business blogs, and social media. Vanessa had given an exclusive interview to a media outlet she once helped cultivate for the Whitmore Community Foundation. The headline was carefully designed. Former Whitmore insider claims Claire used charity network to isolate husband. Claire read it twice from her hospital bed. Then she stopped. Ethan slept in the bassinet beside her. His tiny chest rose and fell beneath a striped hospital blanket. Claire looked at him. That mattered. The headline did not. At least, that was what she tried to tell herself. Nate stood near the window with his iPhone in his hand. His face was pale with anger. "She's lying." Claire did not look at him. "About some things. About you." Claire finally raised her eyes. Vanessa's interview did not accuse Claire of stealing money. That would have been too easy to disprove. Instead, she chose something more subtle. She claimed Claire had spent years using personal favors to build a private loyalty network around the Whitmore name. She suggested doctors, contractors, clergy members, and donors had turned against Nate because Claire had quietly influenced them. Vanessa called Claire calculated, strategic, more powerful behind the scenes than people understood. Every accusation took something good Claire had done and twisted it into manipulation. That was what hurt. Not because Claire feared being exposed. Because Vanessa had turned sick children, grieving families, frightened mothers, and struggling workers into pieces of a revenge story. Nate looked toward the door. I'm calling legal. You should. I'll shut this down. Claire's voice remained calm. You can't. Nate stared at her. She signed confidentiality agreements. That doesn't erase everything she's allowed to say. She took internal documents. Then handle that through your lawyers. Nate stepped closer. Claire, she's attacking you. I know. You should be furious. Claire looked at Ethan. I'm tired. The words stopped him. For months, everyone had expected Claire to be angry. Angry enough to fight. Angry enough to humiliate Nate. Angry enough to destroy Vanessa. But Claire had reached a different place. She did not want revenge. She wanted peace. Then another notification appeared on Nate's phone. A second article. This one repeated Vanessa's claim that Claire's charitable work had been designed to make people personally indebted to her. Claire's expression changed. That was the line. Not because it insulted her, because it insulted everyone she had helped. She picked up her phone. Nate watched her. What are you doing? Calling Maggie. Within hours, Dr. Margaret Lawson arranged a meeting with the independent committee overseeing the Whitmore Community Foundation review. Claire refused a press conference. She refused a television interview. She refused every reporter waiting outside the hospital. Instead, she agreed to speak remotely at the foundation's scheduled governance session 3 days later. When the day came, Claire sat at home in Queens. Ethan slept against her chest in a soft carrier. Her MacBook Air rested on the kitchen table. Daniel stood in the next room making coffee. No makeup team, no publicist, no expensive backdrop, just Claire. The committee chairman appeared on screen. Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for joining us. Claire is fine. He nodded. Vanessa Caldwell has suggested that your personal, charitable relationships influenced recent resignations and contract decisions. Did you ask anyone to withdraw support from Mr. Whitmore or the foundation? No. Did you coordinate with Dr. Lawson? No. Mr. Dawson? No. Father Brennan? No. Any donor? No. The chairman continued. Did you ever offer assistance with the expectation of future loyalty? Claire looked directly into the camera. No. A board member asked. Then how do you explain so many people making similar decisions after your divorce? Claire paused. I can't explain decisions that belong to other adults. The room went quiet. Then Claire continued. I can only explain mine. She looked down briefly at Ethan. When I was a nurse, I helped people because they were scared, sick, or alone. Her voice softened. When I worked with the foundation, I did the same thing. She took a breath. I never asked anyone to remember me. Another pause. And kindness is not a debt. The chairman looked up. Claire continued. Nobody I ever helped owes me loyalty. That sentence changed everything. Not because it was dramatic, because it was simple. Dr. Maggie Lawson spoke next. My resignation was my decision. Bobby Dawson appeared remotely from his office. So was mine. Father Michael Brennan sent a written statement. No request from Claire. No coordination. No retaliation. One by one, the narrative Vanessa built collapsed. Then came the part nobody expected. A nurse from Claire's old emergency department requested permission to speak. Her name was Anna Reed. She had known Claire for more than a decade. Claire once stayed 6 hours past her shift because a woman was dying alone. Claire looked down. Anna continued. There were no reporters there. Another former patient submitted a statement. Then another family. The committee chairman finally stopped accepting additional testimony because there was too much. Claire had never built a network. She had built memories. Vanessa had mistaken gratitude for strategy because strategy was the only language she understood. By that evening, the coverage changed. The same outlets that repeated Vanessa's accusations now focused on the independent testimony supporting Claire. One headline read, Former nurse denies revenge campaign as community members defend her record. No sensational victory. No celebration. Just correction. Vanessa's PR firm issued a short statement saying it no longer represented her. A communications company that had been considering Vanessa for a senior role withdrew the offer. Not because Claire demanded it, because Vanessa had used confidential relationships and vulnerable families as material for a public fight. Nate read the updates from his temporary office. He watched the recording of Claire's statement twice. Kindness is not a debt. Nobody I ever helped owes me loyalty. He leaned back. For years, Nate had believed Claire was naive because she gave without demanding anything in return. Now he understood that was exactly why people trusted her. Across Queens, Claire closed her laptop. Daniel entered carrying 2 mugs. "You okay?" Claire looked at Ethan sleeping against her. "Yes." "Did it feel good?" "What?" "Winning." Claire thought about it, then shook her head. "It didn't feel like winning." Daniel sat across from her. "What did it feel like?" Claire looked toward the window. "Like finally not letting someone else explain who I am." Her father smiled. That evening, another email appeared in Claire's inbox. It came from the director of a maternal health nonprofit she had spoken with before Ethan's birth. The subject line read, "Executive Director Opportunity." Claire opened it. They were expanding. They wanted her experience, her leadership, her name. Not Whitmore's. Hers. Claire read the offer slowly while Ethan stirred in her arms. For the first time in 8 years, the next chapter of her life had nothing to do with standing beside Nate. Vanessa had tried to destroy Claire's reputation by exposing her influence. Instead, she accidentally proved where that influence really came from, and Claire was about to receive something far more valuable than revenge, a future that belonged entirely to her. 3 months after Ethan's birth, Claire Morgan Whitmore no longer woke up wondering whether Nate would come home. That question belonged to another life. Her new mornings were smaller, quieter, real. Ethan usually woke before sunrise, making soft, restless sounds from the bassinet beside her bed. Claire would lift him carefully, carry him into the kitchen, and warm a bottle while the first pale light reached through the apartment windows. There was no private chef, no marble breakfast room, no staff waiting for instructions. Just Claire, in comfortable clothes, a baby against her shoulder, an unfinished Starbucks coffee cooling beside her MacBook Air. She had never felt richer. The executive director position had become official 6 weeks earlier. The maternal health nonprofit was expanding into Queens and Brooklyn, creating programs for pregnant women facing unstable housing, medical debt, abusive relationships, and high-risk pregnancies. Claire understood those women in a way she had not before. She understood what it meant to feel terrified, while everyone expected you to remain calm. She understood rebuilding. Her days were busy again. Budgets, hospital partnerships, grant applications, staff meetings. Sometimes Ethan slept beside her during video calls. Sometimes Daniel Morgan arrived carrying groceries and immediately took his grandson. "You work," he would say. "I've got him." Daniel had become the kind of grandfather Claire always knew he would be. Present, reliable, never performing for anyone. Nate also saw Ethan. Claire had insisted on structure from the beginning. Scheduled visits, clear boundaries, no unexpected appearances, no discussions about their marriage during parenting time. At first, Nate hated it. Then he followed it. That mattered. He had begun therapy after losing operational control at Whitmore Development. Claire did not know what he discussed there. She did not ask. What she noticed were smaller things. He arrived on time. He learned how Ethan liked to be held. He stopped bringing expensive gifts every visit. One afternoon, he showed up with nothing except diapers and a clean bottle. Claire almost smiled. For Nate Whitmore, that was growth. Whitmore Development had stabilized under an interim CEO. The company did not collapse. That was important. Nate had not lost every dollar. He still owned property, still had investments, still lived comfortably. But the board had permanently separated ownership from daily executive control. Major financing decisions no longer required Nate's approval. Public events no longer automatically placed him at the center. The man who had once believed his name was the company had been forced to learn that businesses could continue without his presence. Vanessa Caldwell learned a harsher lesson. After the foundation review, several communications firms refused to hire her in senior roles. Not because Claire called them. Claire never contacted a single one. Vanessa's problem was trust. Employers saw a woman who had taken internal documents, tried to leverage private information, then turned vulnerable families into material for a media fight. She eventually left New York. Claire heard she had taken a consulting job in another state. She felt no satisfaction, only distance. One Saturday afternoon, Nate came to Claire's apartment for his scheduled visit. Ethan was almost 4 months old. Nate sat on the couch with his son, asleep against his chest. Claire worked at the kitchen table nearby. For 20 minutes, neither spoke. Then Nate said quietly, "I used to think this would feel humiliating." Claire looked up. "What?" "Having to ask when I can see my own son." Claire closed her laptop. "You don't have to ask whether you can see him." Nate looked at her. "You have to respect the schedule." He nodded. I know." There was another silence. Then he looked around the apartment. Small bookshelf, baby monitor, Amazon boxes, family photographs, nothing from their old townhouse. "You seem happy here." "I am." That answer hurt him. Claire could see it, but she did not apologize for it. Nate looked down at Ethan. "I thought you were taking everything from me." Claire's expression changed. "I didn't take anything from you." He looked at her. Claire stood and walked closer. "You lost things because of choices you made." Nate swallowed. "My company. You still own part of it. My reputation. That belongs to other people. My family." Claire's eyes softened slightly. "You walked away from your family before anyone walked away from you." He looked down. Claire continued. "I didn't take your life, Nate." Her voice remained calm. "You walked away from the people who gave it meaning." The sentence stayed between them. Nate did not defend himself. For once he did not explain. He simply nodded. Then he asked the question Claire knew would eventually come. "Will you ever forgive me?" Claire looked at Ethan. "I already stopped hating you." Nate looked hopeful. Claire saw it immediately. She continued. "That is not the same as coming back." His hope disappeared. "I know." "Do you?" He nodded slowly. Claire sat across from him. "You can become a good father." "I want to." "Then become one." "What about us?" "There is no us." The words were not cruel. That made them final. Nate closed his eyes briefly. Claire continued. "You don't get your marriage back because you finally understand why destroying it was wrong." He looked at her. "I loved you. I believe you." That surprised him. Claire's voice softened. "But love without loyalty becomes something people use to excuse pain." Ethan stirred. Nate adjusted him carefully. Claire watched. A few months earlier, she would have given anything to see Nate holding their child like this. Now she understood something painful and freeing. Some dreams arrive too late. And when they do, you are allowed to choose a different dream. 2 days later, Claire received a thick envelope in the mail. Inside was an invitation. The nonprofit's new maternal health center was finally ready to open. Its official name had been approved. The Rose Morgan Center for Maternal and Family Health. Claire touched her mother's name and began to cry. At the bottom of the guest list was one name she had not expected. Nathaniel Whitmore. Claire stared at it for a long time. Then she placed the invitation beside Ethan's crib. Nate had lost the right to stand beside Claire as her husband, but at the opening of the center carrying her mother's name, he would finally see exactly what Claire had built after choosing a life without him. The Rose Morgan Center for Maternal and Family Health opened on a bright Saturday morning in Queens. There were no crystal chandeliers, no red carpet, no champagne tower, no photographers shouting celebrity names outside the plaza. Just families, nurses, doctors, teachers, local business owners, women holding babies, children carrying paper cups of juice, and a simple bronze sign beside the entrance, the Rose Morgan Center for Maternal and Family Health. Claire stood beneath it holding Ethan. For a moment she could not speak. Her mother's name was there. Not Whitmore, not a corporate sponsor, not a donor trying to buy a legacy. Rose Morgan. The elementary school teacher who had packed extra lunches because some children came to class hungry. The woman who had taught Claire that kindness mattered most when nobody was watching. Daniel Morgan stood beside his daughter wearing his best navy jacket. He looked at the sign, then quickly cleared his throat. Claire noticed. "You okay, Dad?" Daniel nodded. "Your mother would have complained the letters were too big." Claire laughed through tears. "That sounds like her." Dr. Maggie Lawson approached and kissed Claire's cheek. Bobby Dawson arrived with his wife and daughter Emily, now healthy and holding the hands of her 2 little girls. Father Michael Brennan stood near the entrance, talking with nurses. Everywhere Claire looked, there were people connected not by power, but by memory. People who had shown up. Claire had once believed wealth was what made Nate's world so strong. Now she understood. Money built impressive rooms. People built lives. The ceremony began at 11. Claire wore a simple cream dress and low heels. Ethan rested in Daniel's arms while she stepped toward the microphone. She had prepared a speech on her MacBook Air the night before. 3 pages, carefully edited. She used almost none of it. Claire looked at the women seated in front of her. Some were pregnant. Some held newborns. Some had tired eyes Claire recognized immediately. She took a breath. When women come through these doors, some will be having the happiest day of their lives. She paused. Others will be having the hardest. The crowd became quiet. Some will have husbands waiting beside them. Claire's voice softened. Some will not. Daniel looked down. Maggie's eyes filled. Claire continued. Some will have money. Some will be terrified about how they'll pay rent next month. She looked toward the center behind her. But every woman who comes here should know one thing. Her voice steadied. She deserves care before she proves she can afford it. She deserves dignity before she earns anyone's approval. And she deserves help without being made to feel like she owes her life to the person who gave it. Applause began slowly, then grew. Claire stepped away from the microphone. That was when she saw Nate. He stood at the back. Alone. No security. No assistant. No Vanessa. No front row chair reserved for the Whitmore name. He wore a dark suit without a tie and held nothing in his hands. For once, Nate Whitmore had entered a room without expecting to own part of it. Claire watched him for a second, then turned back toward the families. After the ribbon cutting, people surrounded her. A nurse hugged her. Bobby introduced his granddaughters. A young mother thanked Claire for helping the center secure transportation vouchers. Daniel carried Ethan proudly from one conversation to another. Nate stayed near the edge. He did not interrupt. That mattered more than Claire expected. Eventually, when the crowd thinned, he approached. Congratulations. Claire looked at him. Thank you. Nate glanced at the bronze sign. Rose Morgan. My mother. I remember. Claire nodded. For a moment, they stood quietly. Then Nate looked across the lobby. Maggie was laughing with Daniel. Bobby was talking to a physician. Former patients stopped Claire every few minutes. Nate watched all of it. I thought they respected me. Claire did not answer immediately. Nate looked at her. They came to the galas. They shook my hand. They took my calls. They did. I thought it was because of what I built. Claire's expression softened. They respected what they believed you stood for. The words landed gently. That made them hurt more. Nate looked toward Daniel holding Ethan. I didn't understand what you were doing all those years. No. You never told me. I shouldn't have had to explain why people mattered. Nate lowered his eyes. I know. Claire almost did not recognize the man saying those words. Not because he had changed completely. He had not. Change took longer than regret. But he was finally learning to hear things without turning them into a fight. Nate reached into his jacket and removed an envelope. Claire looked at it. What's this? A letter. For me? For Ethan. Claire hesitated before accepting it. What does it say? Things I want him to know when he's older. Claire held the envelope carefully. Nate looked toward his son. I don't know what you'll tell him about me. The truth. He nodded. That scares me. It should. Nate gave a faint, sad smile. Then his expression became serious. Will he hate me? Claire looked at Ethan. Then back at Nate. That depends on the man you choose to be from now on. Nate absorbed the answer. No guarantee. No forgiveness certificate. No promise Claire would protect him from his own history. Only responsibility. He nodded. I'll try. Claire shook her head gently. Don't try for me. Nate looked at her. Do it for him. Across the lobby, Ethan began fussing in Daniel's arms. Claire smiled. I should get him. She started to walk away. Claire. She turned. Nate looked at her for several seconds. I'm sorry. Not for the scandal. Not for the company. Not for Vanessa. Just sorry. Claire believed him. And for the first time, believing his apology did not make her want him back. I know. Then she walked toward her son. Later that evening, Claire brought Ethan home. She laid him gently in his crib. On the dresser stood a photograph of Rose Morgan. Beside it was a newer photograph of Daniel holding Ethan while Claire laughed beside them. No wedding portrait. No reminder of the townhouse. No proof that Claire had once been Mrs. Whitmore. She did not need one. Her phone vibrated. A message from Maggie. Board-approved funding for the second clinic. Claire smiled. She looked down at Ethan. Looks like Grandma Rose gets another building. Ethan slept through the announcement. Claire turned off the nursery light. Across Manhattan, Nate sat alone in his townhouse reading the final report from Whitmore Development. The company was stable. The interim CEO would become permanent. Nate would remain an owner, but he would not return to daily control. Vanessa was gone. The gala invitations had slowed. The phone no longer rang constantly. He still had money, property, investments, a Rolex, cars, everything he had once called success. Yet the house had never felt emptier. At the Rose Morgan Center, Claire had stood inside a modest building filled with people who loved and respected her. Nate had finally understood the difference. He had chosen Vanessa. Vanessa had chosen status. The board had chosen stability. The community had chosen integrity. And Claire had finally chosen herself. Nate signed the divorce, believing he was losing one woman. In the end, he lost the life she had quietly made worth respecting, while Claire walked away with the one thing his money had never been able to buy. A life filled with people who stayed because they truly wanted to. So this is where Claire's story finally grows quiet. If you're still here with me, maybe some part of her journey felt familiar. She was betrayed by the man she trusted most. She was misunderstood, blamed, and replaced while carrying his child. She hurt deeply, but she did not beg for love that had already chosen to leave. She walked away with her dignity, even when walking away cost her the life she once prayed for. That may be the lesson worth keeping. You cannot control who disappoints you, who misunderstands you, or who chooses someone else. But you can control what you do next. You can protect your peace. You can stop explaining yourself to people committed to seeing you wrongly. And you can choose yourself again without becoming cold. Claire did not win because Nate lost. She won because she stopped letting his choices decide her worth. And yes, apparently dignity looks pretty good without a Rolex.